back. We are continuing our study of crucifixion and salvation in human history and looking at the relevance it has to Christians and Muslims today. And we've said that already we cannot trust many of the writings because, for example, the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were all written way after the person died. And we just looked at the Gospel of John and how he was beheaded 60 years before he supposedly had written the book. So he was beheaded and dead, and then 60 years later he somehow came out of the grave and rewrote the book. So we know that the book of John was impossible to have been written by John himself. Bart Ehrman, who is a theologian of Christianity, he says in one of his quotes, he says, "He who compares one manuscript to another, no two copies agree in their wording." In other words, when you take two manuscripts dating from the same book or the same writings, say we had to take the book of Matthew, and we had to take two manuscripts of the book of Matthew and put them next to each other and compare these two manuscripts that were copied, not one of them agrees in the wording. That means there are so many variations, so many differences that they don't even agree on the same manuscripts. Today we can take the Quran, we can take the manuscripts dating 600 years ago of the Quran, we can take manuscripts dating 1,400 years ago, and we can put them next to each other and they'll agree on every single dot, every single comma, every single sentence will agree with each other without a difference. Not one discrepancy. However, you cannot do that with any of the Christian documents. Even the copies, you cannot put them next to each other and they'll agree on the wording. The same quote, Mr. Ehrman says that there are 200,000 and 300,000 variations amongst all the manuscripts. And there are more variations in the manuscripts than there are books in the New Testament. In other words, there are so many variations and so many differences, they're not even in the lines they agree with each other. So how were these books put together? If there are so many variations and so many differences, how were these books put together? Now, the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible, it says, "It is safe to say that there is not one sentence in the New Testament in which the manuscripts and tradition are uniformed, or wholly uniformed." In other words, this is, if you pick up the Interpreter's Bible Dictionary, which you can get at any Bible bookshop, so you can go, these are books that the Christians use to study the Bible from, it even says that there are not even one sentence in the New Testament that are uniformly aligned, that they agree on what they say from one copy to the next. The original copies of the New Testament books have, of course, long since disappeared. This is what we've also attested by the Bible Dictionary. Bible Dictionary says there's not even copies of these books around. So many of the original books have gone. They have disappeared. They're no longer around. Somehow they've disappeared. And of course, there are many reasons for why these have disappeared. Some people have claimed that they were disappeared deliberately so that no one could ever find the originals. And they can say, no, these were quoted from the original. That's one way. Some people say they're degraded over time. There are many different reasons. In the first place, these writings were written on papyrus. This is what we are told. The first place they were written on papyrus. Later they were written on parchment. Some people say they were written on clay and so on and so on and so on. But originally, it is claimed they were written on papyrus. Now, papyrus wouldn't have lasted very long, so it would have decayed and would have disappeared. So the original copies of the New Testament and a lot of the Old Testament are not to be found in its original concept. You only have copies of copies of copies, and they do not agree. So the early Christian community, many of them didn't even know what the Gospels were. They never even heard of Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. They'd only heard of the writings of Paul. So these original documents that were supposed to date back, like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the early Christians had no idea about them, never even heard of these books. So they're only written much later. So if we look at the textual criticism, that means we take a text and we start looking at it and we analyze it. We have to see whether this book is reliable or trustworthy or not. It's called textual criticism. Very few people understand what textual criticism is. And textual criticism is a look at the different implements that put together and bring these writings together. We have a look and we see if these writings agree with each other. Who wrote them? Who rewrote them? Who selected them? Who chose these books? Who chose these chapters and verses to put them together? So that's what we mean by textual criticism. We have a look at, can we trust these documents? Who put these together? Why were they put together? Why were these lines chosen and these lines not chosen? Why was only 18% of the texts that were found used and the other 82% not used? So we look at that type of thing. Hence we have to look into the Greek New Testament, because the Greek New Testament is nothing more than an addition of work that has been put together. It's a lectured edition of work, so we trust the Greek New Testament more than any other of the testaments today. Modern Christians use the Greek New Testament, the Greek translation, and they ask, why do we trust these? Because these were put together under election. In other words, we could rename the Bible the elected books of the Bible. In other words, people got together and they decided, how will we put these books together? Let's vote on it, and people voted on it and they elected what books would be there. So scholars, they sat around a table and they picked and chose what books would go into the Bible. So there are many different editions. There are many different verses of authenticity, supposed authenticity of the Bible that were put together, and they decided what was more common. So you will see here that I have a Bible, and I don't know if the camera will pick this up, but you'll see on here there's a little symbol. It's a little symbol, looks like a man running, and this is the Bible Society symbol. It has changed over the years. There's been many different symbols written on them, and all the Bibles that are basically approved and recommended have this symbol on it. This one's got a bit of writing in, so you won't see it so much, but you'll see there's a little symbol here, and it says the Bible Society. In other words, it's approved by the Bible Society. Now, you get this in the New Testament, and the Old Testament, and the combination of New Testament books. You get this in the King James Version, the New International Version, the Living Bible, all the different versions of the Bible, over 2,000 odd versions of the Bible today. You get them, and most of them have that symbol in them. Those who don't have them, they are not really recommended to read because they're not approved by the Bible Society. But the Bible Society is a committee of people that sat around and they said, this book should be in the Bible, this book shouldn't be. Just normal men, born of normal parents, had normal upbringing, and they decide what books were going to be in the Bible. So they decide, I think we should put this chapter in, we should put this verse in, we should leave that verse out, leave this chapter out. So it was elected. People decided what should go in and what shouldn't go in. But we don't find that today in the Quran. The Quran was put there because it is the word of Allah. No additions, no subtractions, no elections, no voting, no decisions to reinstate it or take this verse out or put that verse in. We have one version, stayed the same. It's not a work in progress. It's a work that is completed. Hasn't changed. Many of the things in the Quran are very hard and very straightforward. And people would like to modernize it, but we don't because we are not permitted to. It's the word of God. We cannot change the words of God. If we change the words of God, then we're in big trouble. And we would never do that. Because if Allah makes something His word, we cannot change it. And so today, the Bible, we have different versions and different rewrites and interpretations and understandings. Today you can go to a bookshop and you can get commentaries on the Bible that explain how to understand the Bible. So the percentage of manuscripts that were changed over the years, each time they were changed, there's about 10 to 15% of these manuscripts have actually been used. What I've been told, and I'm not sure if this is 100% true because there's still many more manuscripts being found and gone through, but they say there's about 6,000 manuscripts, that only about 10 to 20% of it has actually been used of those 10-odd thousand manuscripts. Now, the first ever edition of the Bible as we have it today, which I said to you before, it might surprise people. Many Christians are under the impression that the Bible has been around for 2,000 years. That's not true. The first ever edition of the Greek New Testament was only available in 1516, and it was available for mankind to read for the first time. And we found that many of the scriptures, many of these verses that are found in the 1516 edition were corrupted manuscripts, and compiled of the New Testament were corrupted manuscripts that were not found in any of the other manuscripts that were found. And so we found that these manuscripts cannot be accepted. Many of them are right, yes, the vast majority of the information is true from what we found in the older manuscripts, but a lot